Well, thank you. Good afternoon, council members. Happy Biodiversity Week. Happy 20th anniversary to OPC. It's an auspicious meeting for a number of reasons, and so I'm really happy to be here today to present on an item that I think is really significantly going to advance our ability to conserve coastal and marine biodiversity here in California, and something that's really, quite frankly, been needed for a long time. And that's a comprehensive plan to guide the management of artificial reefs in California. So next slide, please. So artificial reefs are human-made structures or natural structures that are on the seafloor that mimic some of the characteristics of a natural reef. And historically in California, dating back really to the 1950s and 60s, artificial reefs have been constructed mostly to enhance fishing opportunities. So just a little bit of historic context. Next slide, please. But artificial reefs have the potential to support a whole suite of broader ecological and socioeconomic benefits. So some of those include restoration, shoreline protection and stabilization, as well as mitigation for impacts such as coastal development or lost fishing opportunities, et cetera. So next slide, please. I do think that those co-benefits are very important to consider in the context of California's ambitious biodiversity and climate goals. So as we think about those ambitious goals, we're seeing a major increase in the number of requests to construct artificial reefs, but a lot of knowledge gaps around artificial reefs and the management of these reefs remain. That includes the potential benefits, risks, and impacts of artificial reefs, as well as some of the best practices for where to site reefs, how to design them, what materials should they be constructed with, and how should we be establishing performance metrics, monitoring reefs to make sure they're meeting those performance metrics, and then evaluating and adaptively managing artificial reefs. Next slide, please. So our partner agency, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, has laid a lot of groundwork dating back to 2017, multiple years of interviews with stakeholders and listening sessions to really understand the landscape as it currently relates to artificial reefs and requests for new reefs. And so with this groundwork laid, really I think we are well poised as OPC with our partner agency, the department, to really launch into this development of a new statewide, consistent, and science-based, community-informed plan for artificial reefs. Next slide, please. So what will this plan include? So first of all, we're going to start off with a brief history of artificial reefs in California and lessons learned both from California as well as a synthesis of outcomes of artificial reef studies from around the world. We'll also include some general criteria for siting, design, and construction to address some of those knowledge gaps that I mentioned earlier. And then proposed requirements for different kinds of artificial reefs, including reefs constructed for various purposes like mitigation, like enhancing access and recreational opportunities, et cetera. Importantly, this plan is going to include a governance framework that will guide the collaborative management of artificial reefs and also the role that our external partners can play in institutionalizing this management plan. Next slide, please. So we're proposing a four-step process here, and OPC and the department are proposing that we work with our partner California Sea Grant, who really has been a very trusted partner in helping us develop plans like this at the science, policy, and community engagement interface. The first step would really be to facilitate that key scientific and community input, and this would be done in a number of ways. So this would include expert groups of scientists, this would include community listening sessions, and also Sea Grant would be supporting OPC and CDFW in our formal and informal tribal outreach that we plan to conduct to inform this plan. The second step would be to develop a draft plan based on those outcomes and then release that plan for further tribal consultation as well as open public comment. Next slide, please. The third step, and this is an area where Sea Grant has been really, really key in past efforts, is to administer independent scientific peer review of the draft plan. And then finally, the fourth and final step would be to synthesize the outcomes of all of those steps. So the tribal consultation, both formal and informal, scientific peer review, and formal public comment to develop a final plan. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up here by focusing on the benefits, but really, specifically on the equity and environmental justice benefits of this proposed plan: improved environmental quality, improved access and recreational opportunities, and then also in particular, the potential for strengthened resilience for coastal communities, including those frontline communities that are threatened by sea level rise through some of this shoreline protection and stabilization work. Additionally, the fact that we're meaningfully prioritizing tribal and community input into this plan is directly responsive to Goal 1 in OPC's equity plan, and the scientific aspects of this work support equity plan Goal 4, which is really focusing on kind of broadening what we consider to be science, right? More inclusive science. Next slide, please. So today, staff is recommending that the council authorize up to $550,000 to Sea Grant to support the development of the Artificial Reef Program plan via that four-step process that I just described. Next slide, please. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have after public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think we have a partner agency. Are there folks from CDFW here to speak?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. My name is Sarah Warton, and I'm an environmental scientist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I work on the Marine Region's Habitat Conservation Program. I'm happy to be here today to represent the department and express our support for Item 8, the development of the California Artificial Reef Program Plan. This project will address a critical and long-standing need for the department and other state regulators to have a science-based and stakeholder-informed programmatic guidance plan to inform the development and implementation of the California Artificial Reef Program Plan. We are excited for the opportunity to partner with Ocean Protection Council staff and California Sea Grant to aggregate the best science available and integrate input from California Native American tribes and stakeholders to develop consistent and transparent guidance to maximize benefits and minimize negative impacts of artificial reefs. Thank you for your support of this important project today.
Good afternoon. Keith Rootsaert, founder of the Giant Kelp Restoration Project in Monterey. I just came back from Sunday from Mexico, at Ensenada, Mexico, where we were doing some kelp restoration research there with the Universidad Autónoma de Baja, California, where we are planning on returning actually at the end of this month to do some more. It would be really nice if we could do kelp restoration here in California, where I live and pay taxes, but kelp restoration is illegal in California until probably 2027. Aquaculture, artificial reefs, and kelp restoration have been allowed by the fishing industry in Baja for many years, and with great success. Kelp is growing on ropes and concrete structures, and with lobsters taking up residence. Green abalone are making a comeback. In California, Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council asked the department to allow divers to sink a ship in Monterey over 7 years ago. We had a line on a 110-foot ship, and in Antioch, we were going to pay for everything, but we were told that the department did not have a permitting process for an artificial reef, which seemed incredible to us because the Yukon in San Diego is a very popular shipwreck diving site, but that is outside of state waters, so that's why it was allowed. We asked the department to look at Florida, where they permit many artificial reefs, but that is where this idea went to die. So we are really glad this has come up again here in California. Our FGC petition 2023-23 MPA asks to allow artificial reefs so kelp can grow on them. We were advised it costs about $300,000 for permits and takes about 18 months to get through 6 or 7 agencies. Permitting is a huge issue. So I hope that this $500,000 study, you can streamline the process and make a way for us to establish artificial reefs to support kelp restoration at Tankers Reef in California someday. Thank you.
I have a question of Michael, and then a comment. Yeah. Could you please repeat exactly what you mean by inclusive science? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I mean, this project is intended to be informed not just by, scientific expert working groups, but also by these public listening sessions and kind of broadening the tent of who we're listening to and developing these science-informed plans. So I was pointing out that that's really responsive to Equity Plan Goal 4, which focuses on kind of, moving beyond just working with kind of the usual suspects, in the scientific community, and broadening the diversity of voices at the table.
Okay, but I guess from my perspective, that's a little bit different from science.
Yeah, that's fair. I think there's two things really at work here, right? There's the community input, right, which is different from science, but then in terms of the scientific input, we want to diversify the voices of the scientists as well.
Sure, no,
that
absolutely.
we're listening to. So that would include, not just academics, but tribal scientists, for example. That's really what we mean when we say inclusive science.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And just a comment, if you don't mind. I think this is terrific and super, and as I think Michael mentioned earlier, long overdue, that state funding be put into providing a scientific basis for artificial reefs and the artificial reef program here in California. I would just say I attended one of the 2017 CDFW sessions. And unfortunately, while there was interest generated at the time, because as I think probably some of you know, should Reefs to Reef ever become a reality here in California, it depends on there being an artificial reef program. And while the artificial reef statutory language came in the mid-'80s, the program has been, as I think, again, some of the commenters noted, largely defunct for the last few years, or decades, really. And it is so important, and I would just emphasize all the comments that have been made about ensuring that there's a solid scientific underpinning to whatever comes out of this process funded potentially today by the OPC. And it's very important that that science be considered in the context of all of the OPC's policies, particularly with marine pollution, as well as biodiversity, sustainable fishing, and responding to climate change. I have noticed, particularly in the last few years, that when people are concerned about sea level rise, one of the things in the newspapers that often gets trotted out is, oh, we'll put an artificial reef there, that'll solve the problem. And I think what I'm certainly very hopeful comes out of this process is that artificial reefs will be very important in some locations in California and in coastal waters, but not in all of them. They won't really be the solution everywhere. And, to have robust science underpinning that, I think will be very important. One other point I'd like to make is that I think we've seen with the experience with the Wheeler North Reef, which is the compensation for the San Onofre nuclear generating station, is that using an artificial reef for compensatory mitigation is actually really complicated. And I certainly hope that as part of this process, we will get more science development into what the factors are that will need to be taken into consideration should an artificial reef be one method used for compensation. I would also like to just flag, and again, this is super important, I know a little bit outside the OPC scope, but the idea of trying to figure out how to manage an OPC program from an artificial reef program from a regulatory perspective, who makes those decisions, what's the process, completely hear the commentators' frustration with the permitting process, but it is complicated to permit in some of the most sensitive ecological parts of California, and there's multiple agencies with jurisdiction, and trying to understand, the right path, the right process to go through, particularly if an artificial reef doesn't work. I know that in some of the last heyday of artificial reefs in the 70s and 80s, there were, for example, leasing done indefinitely by the State Lands Commission of certain water bottoms. And I have recently asked the State Lands Commission, hey, what's going on with that reef? And no one knows because no one's looked. So, certainly tracking and understanding and addressing what if the artificial reef fails, who will be responsible for removing it, I think is going to be very important as the artificial reef program is developed in the future. But again, fundamentally, I have to say it's very, very exciting that the OPC is considering putting resources behind development of the state's artificial reef program. Thank you.